grab the cat chocolates if you need to. Just grab the cats if you have to. Hi everyone, welcome to Somerset House and our new digital series, Upgrade Yourself Peer Exchange. My name's Scott and I'm delighted to be back again representing the Creative Careers and Skills programme. Today's event is being streamed live on Twitch, Somerset House website, YouTube Live, Facebook Live and Twitter. If you'd like to ask a question, and for a chance it could get read out, please comment on one of the platforms using the hashtag Somerset House. Our Creative Careers programme supports emerging new talent and offers access routes into the creative industries, which we deliver in 3 strands. Number 1, the Creative Careers Academy, which offers full-time work placements fairly paid at London living wage within the creative sector. Number 2, the Creative Job Studio, mentoring and networking events in partnership with grassroots organisation Creative Society. And number 3, Upgrade Yourself, skills enhancing workshops and talks, both delivered digitally and eventually IRL in real life. Today, Somerset House Studios Artist Maeve Brennan will be presenting some of her work and some of her ideas, and you'll see me a little later for some questions with Maeve that you'll be sending through. But for now, sit back, grab a coffee, have your lunch, feel free, get comfortable and immerse yourself, as I'm now delighted to hand over to Maeve. Hi, Maeve.
Hi, thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. It's a bit strange not being able to see who's there, but I'm going to talk as if there were people there. So along the side of this introduction, I'm going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes about my practice. We're going to be showing some images, stills from my videos and works, and also some behind the scenes pictures from the shoot of The Drift, which I'll be talking about in detail later. So to start off, a brief introduction about me. I'm an artist working mainly with moving image and film, but also installation, printed matter, sculpture and photography. In my practice, I utilize a documentary approach, carrying out long-term investigations. I gain intimacy and proximity with people and places and allow these encounters to lead the work with the aim of producing complex and layered accounts that disrupt dominant representations. Though I work mainly with video, I always begin with something material or tangible. So this could be a site or an object, a piece of oil shale, an archaeological fragment, a Roman temple, or an old BMW. There's an interest in the forensic, in how an object or site might be interrogated to make observations about the world it exists within. The object contains a history, it's part of an economy, it connects different people, places and moments in time. Within my work, there's a recurrent interest in disciplines that are tied to a material practice. So archaeologists, geologists, mechanics, restorers, architects, and most recently, chiropterologists. They're bat experts. These disciplines depend upon a knowledge or understanding gained through intimate work with their object of study. And this is something I try to echo in my own practice. So for me, these material practices are attempts to make sense of the world through a tangible point of reference. A geologist reads the world through stones, an archaeologist reconstructs fragments in order to better understand an ancient civilization. My films document these forms of work, capturing human gestures, engaging in acts of care and restoration, maintenance and repair. Time is central to my practice, in my process and my subject matter. I work very slowly, often relocating to specific places, spending time observing, absorbing and documenting. There's an immediacy to this process, an attempt to capture or relay something close to my experience, but always allowing space for new encounters to redirect the trajectory of the work. This process takes time and it allows me to gather multiple perspectives that can attest to the ambiguous and entangled nature of the people, places and networks that my work engages with. Time also figures as my subject matter. I'm drawn to densely layered geological and archaeological sites. A number of my films were made in Palestine and Lebanon, where many of the oldest continuously inhabited sites can be found, and where traces of the past constantly seep to the surface. My works excavate these layers across different timescales, geological, archaeological, evolutionary, human, and industrial. I often return to a quote by Hartmut Bitomsky on the filmmaker Peter Nessler that I feel encapsulates this approach. He said, "Finding, showing, holding, like an archaeologist patiently and meticulously digging into the soil of material life, uncovering and preserving traces of histories that continue to haunt the present." I graduated from Goldsmiths in 2012. I studied fine art there. And when I graduated, I received a research grant to go to Jerusalem and the West Bank to research the significance of Jerusalem stone in relation to the work of my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was an architect called Ernest Richmond, and he was based in Jerusalem from 1917 to 37. The image you're seeing now is an image from a book he produced. So at the time, I was at Goldsmiths Forensic Architecture, run by Israeli architect Eyal Weizman, started their department, and I became interested in their work. So Weizman wrote a book called Hollow Land, which investigates architecture's role in the occupation of Palestine, and describes how political, historical, and social forces crystallize immaterial manifestations there. Around that time, I also discovered a book that my great-grandfather had written, the image you're seeing now. It was an architectural survey of the Islamic shrine in the old city of Jerusalem called the Dome of the Rock, which is this building, and it was published in 1924. That book and the research I undertook at that time became the basis of my film Jerusalem Pink, which I made in 2015. Ernest Richmond's scientific observations that are written into that text appear in the film, but I was really struck by one statement he made in the introduction of that survey, and that kind of has fed my thinking ever since. So he said, "The Dome of the Rock is alive, almost in the same sense that a man is alive. It changes its tissues and it renews its structure in order to maintain power to enshrine the soul that is in it." So he was kind of talking about human acts of maintenance and repair, preserving that building as a sort of political gesture. And that's kind of initiated an ongoing interest for me in the latent political agency of maintenance and repair, particularly in places subject to recent or ongoing conflict. So in Jerusalem Pink, we meet 4 figures working with stone in contemporary Palestine: a geologist, an archaeologist, a stone worker, and an architect. And the film builds up a kind of stratified or layered image of Palestine. So you see stone as geological material, as economic resource, as landscape, and as architecture. The interviews engage with various forms of expertise or embodied knowledge that relates to this highly charged landscape through its material properties. For instance, the geologist you meet, Dr. Taleb, the first thing he said to me when we sat down together in our first meeting was that you could take him anywhere by helicopter, blindfolded, and drop him anywhere in Palestine and he would know exactly where he was by the rocks that surrounded him. So I shot that film over a month in Jerusalem and the West Bank alone, without any crew. Although I'd been researching Jerusalem stone for a sustained period, the shoot was actually mostly unplanned and came together through a series of encounters. I shot vast amounts of footage, and the structure of the film was formed through a lengthy editing process. This approach is crucial to my work as it leaves space for a kind of attentiveness. And I wanted to quote from a text by Erica Balsam, the film's film critic and writer. She wrote a text called The Reality-Based Community in 2017. It was published in eFlux. And in it, she describes a form of observational documentary that has been adopted by a number of artists. And she asserts the significance of that form in a climate of fake news and an increasingly paranoid and unstable relationship to reality and truth. So in it, she says, "These films retreat from any posture of domination to to instead provide thick descriptions of the irreducible complexity of the world, its vital excessiveness and ambiguity. And I think that kind of thought has been feeding my approach ever since. So I'm just going to briefly introduce the drift, and then we'll see a 10-minute clip. So following on from Jerusalem Pink, I produced The Drift in 2017. I had moved to Beirut in 2013, and I ended up living there for 3 years. The film kind of continued the themes of repair that I'd begun with Jerusalem Pink, and also continued with the documentary process that I've described already. The film kind of came about through encounters with the various characters across the 3 years that I was living there. So first off, I met Hashim, who you'll see in the film. He's an archaeological restorer based at the American University in Beirut. I met him through a friend who was studying archaeology there. And basically he was based out of a basement office at the university, and had been piecing together these kind of Roman pottery fragments for 25 years. He was originally untrained, so it was a self-taught skill for him. And I was quite amazed to go into that basement office and in the back room find shelves and shelves of kind of reconstructed pottery that still had all of these holes left, because of course there were missing fragments. And so you'll see Hashim in the film clip that we're about to see. At the same time, like while I was in Beirut, the destruction of Palmyra was taking place in Syria, and a kind of awareness of the risks to heritage sites in that region. And I became aware of a string of temples that lined the eastern flank of Lebanon, so in the Bekaa Valley, so bordering Syria. And I'd heard that each of these temples had a gatekeeper or a guardian that was kind of protecting the site. And that's how I met Fakhri, who you'll also see in the film. He was a Roman temple guardian, and he had been guarding the temples of Niha for 43 years. So protecting and preserving those sites even throughout the civil war, when bombs were raining down very nearby, as he told me. So alongside all of this, I'd been really aware of a kind of prevalence of joyriding as part of the youth culture in Lebanon, and I was particularly interested in the prevalence of scrapyards and these kinds of car part shops that were all over the city and all over the country. So in the kind of conception of the film, I wanted to involve a character who was from a younger generation, who would basically be able to work with cars in the same way as Hashim could work with his pots. And that's Mohammed, who you'll meet also in the clip we're about to see. The whole film is set in the Bekaa Valley, where this kind of youth culture and heritage sort of collided. It's a place which is filled with scrapyards, but it's also the home to the ruins of Baalbek, which is a major World Heritage Site. So the film is kind of built on two axes. The vertical, it investigates the archaeology, kind of layered histories and the rootedness of certain characters, and the horizontal kind of through Mohammed, as he kind of speeds across the landscape, speaks of escape and kind of exists within this kind of contemporary moment. So the film kind of sees these main characters and their stories intertwine. And I think we'll have a look at the film clip now, if Eleanor can get up.
تصميم تحت البراميل تبع الحجاره.
شاف شو حلوين حلوين. هلا شوف هاي كرسي العمود. هاي كفايتها. شوف الخيزران اللي عاملينه هن. ايه هاي بتجي من هون من قدام. هايدي العتبة تبع هايدي التعتيبة من فوق. شو هاي كملتها هونيك، هاي الخيزراني هايدي. تعرفي كل حجر وين محل. ايه هلا اكيد مش كل الشباب بتعرف، يعني مش من مكانه بيعرف وين محل هاي الحجار الا لا يكون هو مشتغل بايده. يعني هلا مثلا مثلي انا بعرف كل حجر وين محل. هلا انا مثلا شباب جديد بعاصر اليوم ما حداش بيعرف وين محلهم يعني.
هاي سيارة الشهيد علي صالح. هيدا قائد بحزب الله، قائد كبير يعني. بسنة 2003 قصفوه الإسرائيلية، اختلوه باغتيال. يعني كان رعبهم هو. فكل ما أمرق من هون بتطلع بالسيارة هاي بقول يا عمي والله الدولاب جديد، شي ساعة بدي يجي يفكفكن وياخدهم معه. جنوطة الشركة هاو الأساسيات تبع البيئان. ايه هاي بومي 525 هون، بيجوا موديل 91 و92 هون. بس سيارات حلوة يعني. خسارة على موت. راح هو والسيارة الله يرحم. الدولاب والله الدولاب بعدهم بالعلبة. نجيناش النهار نفكفك. والله دي عانيت.
هودي غرف رمال. هلا في الأساس ها بيجي الأساس من هون بكفي هذا هون برجع هيك. وكمان تحت كمان في كمان غرف كمان مثل ها.
وبنقعد منشفط على طريق العام، بالساحل بالجبال، يعني خلص مطرح ما نكون واقفين لازم نشفط، لازم نترك اثر إلنا ذكرى. كله رايح، بني ادم والسيارات وكله رايح. يعني الواحد يعيش حياته من هلا احلى.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so following that, I'm going to do a kind of case study of the drift and talk in detail about how it came about and the process of making it. So as I said before, with Jerusalem Pink, I was shooting it alone across the one month in Jerusalem and the West Bank. And this process was quite a big development on from that. I was basically invited to submit a proposal. I received a letter in the post for a moving image commission that was going to be co-commissioned and funded by 3 UK galleries. That was Chisenhale Gallery in London, Spike Island in Bristol, and the Whitworth in Manchester. So that didn't come out of nowhere. The director of Chisenhale, Polly Staple, had actually seen my degree show work at Goldsmiths in 2012. And she put the film I made then into a graduate screening. And she had been kind of following my work ever since. So inside the letter, it said that there was going to be a budget of £20,000, which was also kind of beyond anything I had experienced before. I kind of thought it was all insane to be invited, and yeah, it was a really, really terrifying and exciting opportunity. And I had to write a proposal for a moving image work. And in terms of the proposal, I contacted a bunch of my old tutors at Goldsmiths for advice, because this was obviously a big opportunity and I didn't want to mess it up. And one of my old tutors told me to kind of use the proposal to draw as clear an image as you can of the film you're envisioning. And for me, that's quite difficult because of the way I work. I kind of accumulate footage and experiences, and the carving out of the work happens in the edit. But because I'd been living in Lebanon for almost 3 years at that time, I had some ideas of what I wanted to appear in this film. I'd already met Hashim, and I knew of Fakhri in the Bekaa Valley. And I'd also traveled a lot across Lebanon and seen a lot of the sites that ended up appearing in the film. So after that, I was selected for interview along with 3 other proposals, and I had to present the film idea to a judging panel, which was also very scary. I was quite young. I was 25 at the time, and yeah, it felt like being on X Factor or something. And then once the application was selected, it was kind of a whole different process to what I was used to. I had the support of these institutions behind the project, which was a new kind of feeling. And they also were kind of involved in fundraising for further funding, because they had explained to me that the proposal I'd submitted would cost more than what they had already attributed to the moving image work. So we applied for extra funding from Arts Council England, and that kind of process was quite laborious. And also we actually had to reapply a number of times, and that was going to be one of my pieces of key advice, actually, is that Arts Council experience a huge number of applications, especially from London, and if you do have a good proposal, you won't necessarily get funded the first time, so definitely keep applying with it. And the film proposal I had put forward had this kind of new, ambitious sort of cinematic demand. I said that I wanted the film to have these kind of cinematic shots, and that would involve a crew for the first time. But I'd also made it clear that I wanted to hold on to something of the documentary process that I had developed in previous works like Jerusalem Pink and other films before that. And it was really important to me that this new work didn't completely abandon the working process I had developed already. So the whole process included a 2-month research period for me in Lebanon, where I was carrying out further research, shooting some things myself and doing recce's and sourcing crew for a second shoot in autumn that was going to be the kind of cinematic stage of the film process. So during that 2-month period, I went out to meet the gatekeepers of these various temples in the Bekaa Valley. And it was actually when I first got to meet Fakhri, even though I'd been told about him before by my archaeologist friend. In order to go and film in those sites, I had to approach the Ministry of Culture, the Lebanese Ministry of Culture. And this was a really interesting process, actually. You had to get permissions for specific sites. And I had already been to visit certain gatekeepers, and they'd spoken very openly about the sites that they'd protected and looked after, and told me lots of kind of local stories about how certain treasures were said to have been found. Gold was supposed to have been found in caves up from one of the sites. There was even a story of a kind of a stone archway that was believed to contain gold. So a village kind of blasted the stone archway apart and didn't find anything. But the Minister for Culture that I was working with said that I couldn't actually interview those gatekeepers on camera because their archaeological knowledge wasn't factual. And he wanted to give a kind of a very factual impression of the heritage sites in that area. And for me, this was a bit of a difficult part of the project, because I was really interested in these anecdotal histories and the kinds of information that were maybe not formally known or written down. But in the end, he let me film with Fakhri, I think because he had been there for so long and had such a high status in the local area for having protected his temples throughout the Civil War. So that was how it worked out with the gatekeepers. In terms of Mohammed, this involved kind of filming in a town called Britel, which is very close to the border of Syria. In fact, there's a road that leads directly from Syria to Britel, and it's called the Outlaws Road. And this town was of interest to me because it's kind of surrounded by scrapyards. And it's also the town that people had told me was where if you get your car stolen, that's where the car will end up. And this was actually turned out to be true because my DP that I ended up working with, his uncle had had this experience. Basically, you had to go to Britel to collect the car and pay a ransom to whoever was taking care of it. So I was basically interested in that area also because since the war began in Syria, artifacts were being smuggled through Britel from Syria, and this kind of burgeoning market for smuggled artifacts had appeared. And this is actually something I'm looking at in my current research, but maybe I'll speak about that later. In the end, I had to arrange to work with a fixer, which is someone who's from a local area, who knows people and knows networks there. And it took the entire 2 months to find Mohammed because I had this idea of a character. He was the only character that I actually hadn't found before I wrote the proposal. And I wanted this character to be as kind of as able with cars as Hashem was with his pots. And he also had to be a joyrider because I had this idea of joyrider scenarios in the film. So I was also meeting with all of these joyriding groups in the mountains and in different areas. And it was actually 3 days before I was due to leave that we drove around the scrapyards one last time in the Bekaa Valley. And I found Mohammed outside one of the car workshops. And I asked him if he'd do a test shoot in the scrapyard. And it was quite amazing because he, even during that filming, he was carrying some tools and he started to undo the car headlights that he was standing by during the interview. So it was like as if it was a complete obsession of his. And that was how I found Mohammed. So during that stage of the 2 months in Lebanon, I also was sourcing crew for the shoot in autumn. And it's really important if you're working with other people to meet and establish a kind of dynamic or relationship and see how you'll be working together. So I'd been put in touch with various DPs or directors of photography to work with for the autumn shoot. And I ended up having to choose between two. One was very established and had worked with some major Lebanese filmmakers that I really admired. And the other, Mark Khalifa, who I ended up working with, was a bit younger, a bit less experienced. And the reason for this was that I kind of wanted to have a more equal sort of creative balance in the making of the film. And I was afraid as a very young new director that I would be sort of overwhelmed by the experience of the more established DP. And it turned out to be a really great decision. And Mark was really great to work with. We also had to source a line producer, which is a producer that's in a specific location if you're filming somewhere away from where you're based. So I had a producer through Spike Island, Ali Roche, who helped find Jinan Dager, who was based in Beirut. And it was through her that we got all the permissions for the shoots, and she organized the entire 4-day crew, which was a massive relief, having shot the whole of Jerusalem Pink alone and having to kind of source all the characters and plan all the meetings. I really understood why films have producers. So after I got back from that research period, I kind of went through a consolidation process with the footage. And this involved working with a translator. And for, I think it took 6 or 7 days, we went through over 30 hours of footage and made rough translations of everything that I'd shot so far. And this was really important to get the sense of the material that I had and what I needed from the second shoot. And even though I had like a vague kind of basic understanding of Arabic, I didn't have enough to work with that footage properly. So when I returned in autumn with the crew, this was quite a different process to what I was used to. I had to produce a storyboard, which is a normal process in filmmaking, but as I've said before, I kind of work the other way around and accumulate footage and then kind of carve out things afterwards. So the storyboard was really necessary because we had this specific 4 days, a very limited amount of resources. And yeah, we kind of had to stick to the time schedule and get the shots that we needed. And it was helpful. It kind of forced me to think in a slightly different way. And because I'd already gathered quite a lot of the footage using my own documentary process, I knew where the gaps were and what we needed to get. So the 4-day shoot was interesting, and there were a lot of surprises that happened on location. I think I have some images, but I don't know if Eleanor's around to put up that are kind of backstage shots or like shoots for recce's and on location. Thanks, Eleanor. So we'll get to those in a minute. But there was one of the days that we were shooting with Mohammed. We were supposed to do this kind of big driving scene where he was speeding really fast down this road, and he arrived late. Basically, Mohammed was also a kind of an outlaw, and he would always have to take other roads to meet us on different locations, so mountain roads, so that he avoided the checkpoints that are kind of really everywhere on the main roads in Lebanon. So we thought he was late just because of that, but it turned out that he'd smashed the right side of his car, and there's some pictures further down in the PowerPoint, but he'd broken his right mirror and his window because he'd been driving the wrong way around down a road, and he'd had to avoid this woman. But it was kind of interesting because in the film's kind of premise, Mohammed is sort of scouring the landscape, restoring his car and always fixing it in different locations. And at this point, it started to kind of blur with the reality of the situation. And that day he had to go to the scrapyard, as he does in the film, get new parts, as he does in the film, and kind of restore the car. and we ended up shooting all of that, and some of it appears in the film. So that was interesting in terms of this kind of documentary attentiveness that I was speaking about earlier, and an attempt to capture something that's real or true to a place. Yeah, and also the shot you saw, the last shot of the film, where this kind of dust rises. It was the third take where he kind of was doing these skid marks, and then he drove off before the smoke had settled and sort of disappeared. So these kind of things, when they happen in a shoot, are totally magical, and it was a really, really special experience to see that happen. Yeah, and then when after the shoot, obviously we went into the edit. It was the first time I'd worked with an editor, and it was a really interesting experience for me, because the editing is very much a part of the production of the work. So before I went in even to sit with the editor, I produced a paper edit, which is where you kind of write down all of the significant moments that you've captured. So you're processing all the information, you write down all the significant dialogue, characters. There were a number of characters we'd filmed with that don't actually appear in the film. So there was a big kind of process of distillation and refinement. And so you write all these things down on cards, and you have a kind of physical set of scenes or moments of dialogue that you can play with physically. And for me, that was really essential for my working process, in order to sort of like find where moments were connecting or interweaving, especially when you have so much content. So the paper edit was a really essential skill that one of the editors I worked with, Ariadna, had taught me. Then there was a kind of the sound edit, and also a color grade. And after all of those processes, the film went into these 3 solo exhibitions at the commissioning partners, and also to Lismore Castle Arts in Ireland eventually. And it also showed at film festivals, which was interesting because I realized I'd actually made quite a conventional film in terms of a narrative kind of trajectory in a beginning, middle and end. And initially I was kind of imagining possibly a split screen or, you know, various other sort of ways of installing it, but it ended up really being, you know, almost a feature length narrative documentary. So yeah, I can see the time's running out, but so just to close, I guess I wanted to just reiterate this bit of advice, which was that as you're kind of, as different opportunities arise, I think it's really important to figure out which parts of your process you want to hold on to. And for me, kind of establishing the fact that I wanted those 2 months to work almost as I had done previously in films before was really essential. And like a number of the scenes that I was most happy with, like for instance, the moment where one of the guards approaches the camera with the rock, and actually the scene where Mohammed talks about stealing the tires, those both came out of just a small scale shooting with me and a friend who was doing translation. So, you know, I think it was really important that I stuck to my guns on those things. And yeah, that's my last bit of advice. So I think now we return to Scott and maybe some questions.
Hi, Maeve.
Hey.
You can hear me? You can see me?
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing your beautiful work and your processes. We do have quite a few questions, so I'll try and rattle through quite a few of them quite quickly. So the first one was, what part of the process do you prefer? Your in-depth research or being out in the field and physically filming and being with those people?
That's actually a really good question. I think it's a mixture of the two, because I feel like I can kind of only really find my way through those fieldwork scenarios once I have like an established sort of thinking process and the research to sort of support my otherwise kind of like open-ended curiosity. So they both have their kind of moments of discovery. Being in the field is amazing, but I really enjoyed working with a cameraman because it kind of took away the technical distractions, and I could just focus on kind of directing things. So yeah.
That's a good answer. So you did mention about establishing dynamics and rapport with people in advance. So I guess that level of trust is important, and sort of having a shared experience or shared vision.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the main things that sort of separates these films from like maybe more conventional TV documentaries or these other kinds of I suppose these kinds of filmmaking where people go in with a preconceived idea of what they want to produce, and you know, a certain set of questions, and they just go in and get the answers that they need. Whereas for me, it's very much about building a rapport, as you said, kind of spending time with people for as long as I can before I film with them. And then getting kind of to a point where you get much more interesting answers and much more complex sort of understandings of what their situations are.
Great. Emma's asked a question. Does Maeve collaborate with the same people, or do you approach new characters with new projects?
Well, actually, if I was working in Lebanon again, which I do hope to in future, I would definitely work with all the same crew, actually. I have worked, so in my most recent film, which was the Jawed FEU Award film, Listening in the Dark, which looks at the bat experts and is set in Scotland, it's quite wildly different. I worked with a DP called Jamie Quantrill, and I'm actually about to work with him again on my upcoming project. Yeah, so it's really nice to actually kind of return to the same people, and then you kind of know a little bit better what each other are thinking. And
yeah, the creative family starts to grow and develop.
Yeah, exactly.
When you left art college, did you feel that you were equipped to head into these quite big scale projects? Did you have like sort of business acumen, or you learned through mistakes, I guess?
That's a good question too. Well, as soon as I left, I had to do this trip to the West Bank and Jerusalem, which was because of this research grant, and that was already kind of like pushing me way beyond whatever my I don't know, my comfort zone was. And I think that kind of started off a feeling or like a desire to explore and travel and do these things. And yeah, definitely a lot of mistakes made along the way. But yeah, as I said, when I received the kind of invitation to submit a proposal for this film, which suddenly had like a budget and all this support, I was really surprised, and I really, really didn't think I was going to get it. I remember the day I found out, I screamed on the telephone.
Oh, that's good. Do you, as a creative person, do you reach back into that inner child and remind that kid, like, oh, you wanted to do this creative life? Or how do you feel like when you think back to what your sort of aspirations or dreams are as like a young girl into kind of a teenager or going to art school, and then actually you get those phone calls and those emails saying that we believe in your practice? How does that feel or drive you, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, actually. I posted this event on my Facebook page, and my secondary school art teacher, Miss Snowsill, she wrote, "I'm so proud of you" on there, and it reminded me she was really amazing. Like, she was my teacher when I was 14, and she was really supportive, and I actually did at that point decide I wanted to be an artist. So it's yeah, it is funny when you look back and think how far you've come.
And yet how your heroes, when you're that age, the formative years, you always go back to. I guess that's kind of with the sort of collaborators and the friends you make as well, that you start to work with them and you sort of grow your practice together. Absolutely. Yeah, actually Somerset House has been really vital for that. Just post kind of being in an institution, you know, once you leave art school, you're kind of on your own, and you really, I mean, I missed the community and the kind of constant peer discussions, and Somerset House Studios kind of reawakened all of that. Like, I share a studio with 5 others and we're all really good friends. Lots of us are working in moving image, so that we're going up for a lot of the same opportunities, and kind of there's a lot of exchanges and openness about, you know, applications, and yeah, it's a really sort of collaborative, caring group of people, and the wider Somerset House Studios community as well. Yeah. So I guess maybe just quickly, so how long have you worked at Somerset House Studios? Like for those that don't know, we do have artists working on site as London's working art centre. That's what we, Somerset House would call that. What about your journey in? How did you find getting in? How long have you been there?
Yeah, I joined, well, I suppose 2.5 years ago, which was supposed to be my full run, but they've let a few, I mean, some of us are extending and trying to stay a bit longer, as long as they'll let us stay. Yeah, it was actually after I came back from Lebanon. I found out about it, and I applied and got a space. And it was just really nice to actually have a kind of a building to go to in London, you know, as an artist. It's quite easy to end up working at home, especially if you're kind of working with digital media. But alongside this, I'm also I'm doing a fellowship at the Stanley Picker Gallery, which is based at Kingston University, and that's kind of another bit of institutional support, which is really amazing. But the project actually relates to the drift quite strongly. So I think I mentioned the smuggling route from Syria to Brital, and these kind of artifacts that were coming in. I didn't go into detail, but I did end up meeting with a smuggler who appears in the film, and yeah, it was arranged that we met at 2 a.m. on the side of a highway. And the shot is actually really yellow from the street lights. And it was just me and my small camera and quite bad sound and everything. But I couldn't miss that opportunity. But that kind of, that interaction, and also the interaction with the collector who you see briefly in the clip that we showed, he speaks about this worldwide trade of artifacts run by a secret sort of mafia. And I asked him where all these objects end up, and he said mostly museums in London. And I was kind of really taken aback by that, and that kind of started off, I don't know, like an incentive to kind of look at the Western responsibility for all of the kind of looting and smuggling that was taking place in the Middle East. Because much of that looting and smuggling is actually, it's called subsistence looting, and it's in areas where people don't have any other ways to make a living. They know that they can dig up kind of treasure quite easily because it's so rich with past civilizations. So yeah, this new project is kind of looking at the illicit antiquities network, and I'm working in collaboration again with an archaeologist, a forensic archaeologist this time, Dr. Christos Sirogiannis. Yeah, he's really brilliant, and yeah, we're working on a few projects together, hopefully a film at some point.
Fantastic. And where could people see what's coming up next? Obviously the Kingston University project and different things. We will mention your website at the end, but what will you do? Will you have a showcase or an actual physical exhibition when we're back in real life?
When we're back in real life.
Yeah. Series of podcasts, or how do you see how do you see it moving forward?
Yeah, the project is kind of it's developing towards a solo exhibition, which hopefully in real life will take place at the Stanley Picker Gallery next year. But I'm working on a few other kind of smaller works from this project that will be included in group shows. And also there's the Mediterranean 19, which is a biennial that will take place in San Marino. It's meant to take place in October, but it's been moved to 2021. But all of these things now feel like maybe they won't actually happen, but we'll see. Yeah, but it's also a project that isn't going to be strictly film, and I'm working with other media again, so sculpture, also some printed matter. I'm making some slightly more experimental videos, and but hopefully a feature film as well at some point.
Awesome. Busy, very busy.
Yeah.
I'm sure we have lots of questions still coming in, Maeve. So one of them is, what advice would Maeve give to recent graduates? So how do you keep motivated after graduating, especially leaving sort of a safe space like a university or art school?
Yeah, so I think that's a really essential point, because I guess a lot of friends who I was at art school with stayed in London after Goldsmiths and then really struggled to make ends meet. So it's financially you know, one of the most expensive cities in the world. And so, you know, if you have 3 jobs to try and pay your rent, you can't really afford to have a studio as well and keep up your practice. That was actually one of the incentives for leaving and going to Beirut and trying out this other place. I also grew up in London, and I knew that I needed to live somewhere else, at least for a period of my life. So I think it actually ended up being one of the best decisions, leaving London and kind of, I don't know, making my way through a kind of smaller scene and somewhere that was kind of new and inspiring and kind of, exciting to be in. There's a really amazing art scene in Beirut, and I just was back there in October actually, for the Home Workspace program, which is it was Homeworks 9, which is a kind of biennial that takes place every 4 or 5 years there. But yeah, I would say it's maybe just don't feel too attached to London. If you're based in London, it's also good to get out for a bit. But there's other ways of making things work, like collaborating. I'm now working with a co-op called Black Shuck, and we kind of do these educational programs and skills sharing, and it's really good to be part of different networks, so you feel supported.
That actually follows on. We do have a question saying that I'm quite shy and I don't like to network or go to parties or openings, but if I want to get my work out there, any advice? So you have said like build a collective, work with friends, anything else? I guess starting when you had 2 months out of London, you started from scratch, I guess. So how would you?
I mean, I suppose the internet has really changed things for people that don't like networking, or you can kind of establish a presence online somehow. But I think really the best way is just building relationships with friends and like establishing strong bonds there. And those may kind of lead to things in future, even if, you know, none of you are kind of doing anything public at the beginning.
Be inspired.
Yes.
Do you have to be working every day, developing every day as an artist to be an artist?
I guess, well, being an artist is one of those things where, it's one of these sort of like capitalist, you know, you can't switch off. So it's like, it's 100% of the time basically, but I mean, that's all part of it. And there's many other kind of benefits to having a creative practice. And it also means that you're kind of engaged in doing things that you want to do and the research that you want to follow up on. That's why I've always felt really sort of lucky to be able to work in this area, because it means that I can kind of become an amateur in whatever discipline is interesting me at that point. Which you're not allowed to do in most other disciplines.
So you're not defined by the role as the artist, because actually you're doing fundraising, you're doing promotion, you're doing gallery conversations, etc. So it's kind of I mean, for me, I guess it's more like these other actual topics and disciplines. So like archaeology, geology, all of these that I get to occupy myself with. But it's a multifaceted role, definitely. And it does keep you busy. We're just about to round up. Is there anything else you would like to sort of share with the audience? We do have a resource sheet. You put together some top tips, and we'll share out. Any closing thoughts that you?
I guess just I've always insisted on slowness in my practice, and now it suddenly seems like everyone will have to be a bit slower. So maybe that could be a good thing and let you have some space to think.
Yeah, that's good. So think about pace, workflow, present.
Taking your time and letting things develop organically instead of sort of working to strict deadlines, as we've all been sort of accustomed to for years.
Thank you so much, Maeve. So that's rounding up our first Upgrade Yourself Peer Exchange with Maeve Brennan.
Brave man.
Brave, taking on our first event. MaeveBrennan.co.uk has all of Maeve's projects, so do keep an eye on what is developing, what's coming next with Maeve. With our programme, we will be back in 2 weeks with Evie Kalogeropoulos, who is a brilliant sculpture artist and visual image maker. So until then, thank you so much. Maeve, thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott.
All the best for you guys.